Chapter 5. The house had settled into its evening hush. The children were tucked into bed, their laughter replaced by the soft creak of the wind against the windows. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting amber light across the sitting room. Rose sat curled in the armchair, a quilt draped over her legs, her thoughts still lingering on the fields and Tom's unexpected kindness. Sarah entered with 2 mugs of tea, handing one to Rose before settling into the chair opposite her. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the warmth of the fire between them. Then Sarah spoke, her voice gentle. "We'll be going to Andy's farm on Sunday. It's his birthday." Rose looked up. She recalled the quiet man, the way he had nodded at her without intruding. "He lives nearby?" she inquired, without real interest. "Just over the ridge," Sarah nodded. "About an hour's wagon ride, shorter by horse. He has a small farm, livestock mostly. He keeps to himself." Rose sipped her tea, waiting. Sarah continued, her voice softening. "His wife died in childbirth, 3 years ago. It was sudden. She was young. They'd only been married a couple of years." Rose felt a pang of sorrow. "That must have been devastating for him. I'm sorry." "So was he," Sarah said quietly. "He met her in San Francisco. She was very beautiful, very elegant. He was working for a bank back then. From what Tom tells, Andy was always the one who dreamed of leaving, talked about cities, trains, the ocean, even as a boy." Rose glanced at Sarah, sensing there was more. After a brief silence, Sarah went on. "He left before I arrived, but he'd come back for visits at Christmas. The girls adored him, even then. I only met her once, shortly after their wedding. He came alone, after that. I suppose she didn't care much for this place, and Tom and I didn't want to pry. We never thought he'd return for good." Rose was thoughtful, and yet he did. Sarah nodded. "After she died, he couldn't stay. Said the city felt too loud, too empty. So, he came home. Took over the old farm. It's quiet, but it suits him now." Rose gazed into the fire, the flames flickering like memories. "He seems kind." "He is," Sarah said. "Quiet, but steady. He doesn't speak much about the past, but he listens, and he's good with the children." Rose thought of the way Andy had held Emily, the way he had nodded at her without judgment. There was something grounding in his presence, something that reminded her of the land itself, worn, enduring, honest. Sarah leaned forward. "He's not one to celebrate, but we always go, bring food, sing a little. It's good for him to be reminded he's not alone." Rose nodded slowly. "I'd like to come." Sarah smiled. "I hoped you would." The fire crackled, and the wind whispered against the walls. Rose felt the quiet settle around her, not heavy, but comforting. The story of Andy lingered in her mind, a man shaped by loss, returned to the soil that raised him. She looked out the window, where the moon hung low over the fields. Winter was a season of endings, but perhaps, in its silence, it also held the seeds of something new. Sunday morning arrived with a sky the color of gunmetal, and the hush over the land that felt almost reverent. The snow had crusted overnight, and the wagon wheels crunched loudly as Tom guided them along the ridge road toward Andy's farm. Rose sat beside Sarah, holding a sleeping Emily, bundled in her coat and scarf. The children nestled in blankets behind them, their breath fogging the air with excitement. The journey was quiet, save for the occasional burst of laughter from the girls and the rhythmic creak of the wagon. Rose watched the landscape roll past, fields sleeping under snow, fences leaning with age, trees bare and reaching. It was a world in waiting, and she felt herself waiting too. When the house came into view, Rose sat up straighter. It was massive and stately in a rugged kind of way. Rose has never seen anything like it. A wide 2-story structure with tall windows and a wraparound porch, painted a soft greyish blue that stood out against the snow. The roof was steep and elegant, the trim detailed, the barn nearby freshly painted red. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the grounds were tidy, even in winter. Rose blinked, stunned. This was not the modest farmhouse she had imagined. Sarah glanced at her, grinning. "I wanted to see the look on your face." Rose turned to her, speechless. Sarah laughed. "I did say he worked for a bank. What I didn't say was that he was a big man in the bank." Rose looked again at the house, its size and grace speaking of success, of a life once lived with ambition and means. It was a home built not just for shelter, but for comfort, for permanence. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and apples, and on the counter, the chocolate cake and a golden apple pie, baked by Sarah, who had packed them carefully for the occasion. The children rushed in, their boots thudding against the floor, their laughter filling the space. Andy greeted them with an indulgent grin, his coat already off, sleeves rolled up. He appeared oblivious to Rose's story. Sarah had not told him. He welcomed her with the same gentle nod he'd offered days before. No probing questions, no assumptions. Rose was grateful. Andy spent much of the morning with the girls, allowing them to trail behind him to the barn, letting them feed the chickens, lifting Lily to pet the horses. He moved dexterously, his easygoing nature well suited to their energy. Rose watched from the porch, sipping tea, her breath visible in the cold. She felt something stir inside her, not envy, not longing, but a quiet ache. This man had built a life, lost it, and returned to something solid, and he had done so without bitterness. Sarah joined her. "He doesn't talk much about San Francisco," she said softly. "But I think part of him still lives there." Rose nodded. "It's a beautiful house," she said. Sarah smiled. "He built when he came back, offered to build one for us too, but Tom wouldn't hear of it." Sarah sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "You know I love that man dearly, but sometimes," she said conspiratorial to Rose. Rose could not suppress the laughter bubbling from her throat, knowing full well that Sarah would not change her life with Tom for even the grandest castle in England. Their eyes continued to follow Andy and the girls across the yard. Rose thought of something, then glanced speculatively at Sarah. "Does he live here by himself?" she groped. Sarah nodded. "Yes, though Jim Hanley and his wife Grace are around pretty much all the time. They live in a little cabin down by the creek. Jim helps Andy with the farm work, and Grace cooks and keeps the house, except on the Lord's Day and holidays, of course. Then Andy is pretty much on his own, which is why you'll often find him coming around to the farm on a Sunday. More than any other day, I suspect. It makes him feel less lonely." Rose nodded. They sat in silence, the snow falling lightly now, the children's laughter echoing from the barn. Rose looked out over the land, and the man who had returned to it, and she wondered, for the first time, if endings could also be beginnings. The afternoon unfolded in a gentle rhythm. After feasting on chocolate cake, the children spilled into the snow-dusted yard, their laughter echoing off the barn walls. Inside, the adults lingered over slices of Sarah's apple pie, the kitchen's warmth wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Rose spent most of the day observing, watching Sarah's easy interaction with Andy, Tom's eyes following his wife and children with a tenderness that made a lump in her throat, Andy moving through his home with quiet ease, the girls trailing after him like ducklings. He was patient with them, answering their endless questions. He didn't speak much, but his presence was steady, grounding. Her ears prickled when she overheard Maggie ask with the earnest frankness of an 8-year-old, "Is Aunt Rose going to be your wife, Uncle Andy?" Rose's face burned. She couldn't look up. Andy chuckled, his voice light with teasing. "Your Aunt Rose comes from a land where there live kings and princes. Now, how's she going to marry an ogre like me?" The girls squealed their protests. "You're not, Uncle Andy. 'Tis not true. Not you, Uncle Andy." Andy crouched low, transforming into a hulking shape. "The ogre is here." The children scattered, shrieking with excitement, the question forgotten in the thrill of the game. When the sun dipped low, and the children began to tire, Sarah and Tom gathered them for the ride home. Rose was helping Andy clear the dishes from the long kitchen table. He handed her a stack of plates, and she moved to the sink, the silence between them companionable. "Thank you for the cake," Andy said, drying a dish. "Sarah's baking is always a highlight." "Sarah made both," Rose said simply. "I can't take the credit." Her cheeks burned with the memory of Maggie's earlier question to Andy. "Is Aunt Rose going to be your wife, Uncle Andy?" She wondered if Andy thought of it too, and if he thought that perhaps she harbored aspirations. She wondered if he knew of her past, if he was speculating about the woman who divorced her husband. But Andy appeared oblivious. He was giving her a companionable smile. "Sarah's good at remembering what matters." Rose nodded, then hesitated. "She didn't tell you about me, did she?" Andy looked at her, surprised. "No, should she have?" Rose shook her head. "No, and I'm glad she didn't." A slight hesitation, and then, "It's something I'd like to do myself, someday, maybe." Andy didn't press. He simply nodded and handed her another plate, his expression thoughtful. "I figured you were family," he said. "That's enough for me." Rose felt a quiet warmth rise in her chest. His words were simple, but they reached her deeply. No probing, no assumptions, just acceptance. She looked around the house again, and her heart ached for this man who lost his family before they could enjoy it with him. And yet, he found the strength to start again. She wondered if she could too. When she glanced up, she found his eyes on her. She flushed and said the first thing that came into her head, "It's a beautiful home you made here." Andy paused, then nodded. "When I came back, I just needed something to do. Anything. Something that I could see through to completion. In the end, it turned out bigger than I planned." Rose didn't speak. She didn't need to. Somehow, they found a way to communicate in shared silences. They finished the dishes in silence, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Outside, the wagon creaked as Tom loaded the children, their voices sleepy and content. Andy walked her to the door, his coat already on. "Come again," he said. "Any time. I've got tea, even the fancy ones that you English like so much." He smiled at her, and Rose found herself blurting, "Those elm trees below the ridge must make a beautiful walk come spring. You're fortunate to be surrounded by so much beauty." Andy blinked at her like she revealed something peculiar or unexpected, his head slightly cocked to the side. Then he nodded slowly, thoughtful, like an answer suddenly came to him. "Yes, they are. I am fortunate. Thank you, Rose." He hesitated, then said, "There is beauty everywhere, if one bothers to look. Sometimes you'll find it in unexpected places, or moments. It's the looking that can be hard sometimes," Rose said almost to herself, but Andy nodded. They stared at each other in silence for a moment, a shared recognition passing unspoken between them. "He knows grief," Rose thought to herself, "and he understands." As she climbed into the wagon, Sarah gave her a teasing look, her eyes twinkling. Rose didn't say anything, but she smiled. The ride home was quiet, the sky deepening into dusk. Rose watched the land roll past, the snow glowing faintly in the fading light. She thought about looking for beauty in unexpected places and moments, and about the strength to begin again. Chapter 6. The days following the visit to Andy's farm unfolded slowly, like pages turning in a quiet book. The memory of the house, its size, its grace, its quiet elegance, lingered in Rose's mind. She had not expected it. The wide windows, the polished floors, the sense of success woven into every corner. It surprised her, mostly because he was so unassuming. Rose did not know what to feel. Admiration, envy, sadness. Andy's home was a monument to a life interrupted, a house built to compensate for a future that would never materialize. She thought with sadness of his loss, both his wife and baby. And yet he started again, pouring his love and affection into Tom and Sarah's girls. He made do with what he had, instead of being stuck by what he felt he lost. It made Rose feel some shame for her own preoccupation with what she lost, instead of what she had. Now, back at the farm, Rose found herself thinking about him often, not just the house and his loss, but the man, his quiet way with the children, his gentle nods, the way he had spoken to her without probing. Sarah hadn't told him about her past, and he had appeared oblivious, but his kindness had reached her, nonetheless. The winter days were short, the light pale and fleeting. Rose began to help around the farm, easing into the rhythm of chores. She fed chickens, stacked kindling, helped Sarah with the laundry. The work was grounding, the repetition soothing. One morning, she stood at the edge of the field, watching the snow drift across the furrows. The land was still asleep, but she could sense its patience. It was waiting, just like she did. In the afternoons, Rose would sit by the window with a cup of tea, writing in her journal. She didn't write letters home anymore, not yet. But she wrote for herself, about the land, the silence, the ache that was slowly softening. And she wrote about Andy, not in detail, just fragments. His quiet voice, the way he had said, "That's enough for me," the way in which the girls clearly adored him, his effortless affection for them, and the way he had built a house because he needed to do something after the loss of his own family. She didn't know what it meant yet, but it stayed with her, and in the quiet of the farmhouse, surrounded by snow and children's laughter, Rose began to feel something unfamiliar, not joy, not hope, but the beginning of belonging. Chapter 7. The air was crisp, the trees bare and rattling in the wind. A few weeks before Thanksgiving, Sarah began her preparations with quiet excitement. The farmhouse filled with the scent of cinnamon, cloves, and wood smoke. The windows were dressed with simple garlands of dried corn husks and cranberries strung on twine. Maggie and Nora helped gather pine cones and branches from the woods, which Sarah arranged in baskets and along the mantel. Rose had never celebrated Thanksgiving. In England, the harvest was marked differently, more quiet, less ceremonial. But here, in the heart of the Midwestern countryside, the holiday was a tapestry of tradition, warmth, and food. Sarah explained the customs as they worked side by side in the kitchen. "It's not just about the meal," she said, rolling out pie dough. "It's about gratitude, about remembering what we've come through." Rose nodded, her hands dusted with flour. "I like that." They baked for days, apple pies, pumpkin custards, cornbread, and molasses cookies. Sarah prepared dishes that had been passed down from her husband's family, recipes rooted in the celebration: roast turkey with sage and onion stuffing, boiled root vegetables, baked beans sweetened with maple syrup, and a thick cranberry relish made from berries gathered near the creek. Rose found herself swept up in the rhythm of it all. She helped peel apples, mash squash, and knead dough. She even tried her hand at making butter from fresh cream, laughing when it splashed out of the churn. The house buzzed with activity. The children decorated paper turkeys and practiced a little song Sarah had taught them. Tong brought in firewood and helped hang lanterns on the porch. One afternoon, as Rose stepped outside to shake out a flour-dusted apron, she saw Andy approaching in his wagon. The horses trotted steadily, their breath visible in the cold air. He pulled up near the barn and climbed down, his coat buttoned against the wind. Rose stood still, surprised by the sudden flutter in her chest. Andy saw her and smiled, walking over with easy steps. "Afternoon, Rose," he said. "Hello," Rose replied, brushing flour from her hands. They stood for a moment in the quiet yard, the wind rustling the bare branches overhead. Sarah's voice floated from inside, warm and busy, the children laughing in the background. Andy glanced toward the house. "Looks like you're preparing for a feast." "We are," Rose said. "It will be my first Thanksgiving." Andy smiled. "You'll like it. It's loud and full of food, but it's good." Rose hesitated, then asked softly, "Will you be joining us?" He nodded. Wouldn't miss it. He looked at her for a moment, then tipped his hat. I'll be seeing you then. It felt like a promise. Rose watched him reaching into the wagon, removing a crate and carrying it to the barn. He gave her one last glance before kicking open the wide doors and disappearing inside. She caught the sound of Tom's greeting echoing through the dusty hush of the barn's belly. Rose stood there for a while, apron still in hand, the cold forgotten. Inside, Sarah gave her a curious look as she returned, friendly, knowing, but without a word. Rose smiled to herself and went back to the baking. Thanksgiving was coming, and something else, too.